Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Carrie Drake, Director of Government Marketing, Maxar.
Don't you just love a good marketing sizzle reel? I love that one, but I'm partial. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for joining us. What a wonderful 2 days. Maxar has been a long-standing supporter of AFCEA and INSA and a trusted government partner for many years. It's programs like this where we come together as a community to discuss our challenges and key mission priorities, as well as to learn from our colleagues and peers that are of vital importance. It's only by engaging the full IC workforce, government, military, industry, and academia that we are able to solve the complex problems facing our nation and deliver leading-edge solutions that advance our shared national security mission. It's a tremendous privilege to be associated with so many talented and dedicated professionals. Among them is the moderator of today's session, who I have the honor of introducing to you. JJ Green is the National Security Correspondent at WTOP Radio. He reports daily on international security, intelligence, foreign policy, terrorism, and cyber developments, and provides regular on-air analysis on both radio and TV. Green hosts the weekly podcast, The Target USA, which examines the threats facing the U.S. He also hosts the weekly broadcast program, The Hunt, and conducts in-depth interviews with experts on ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and other emerging terror threats. He has been embedded with the U.S. military 3 times in war zones. He is the recipient of the 2017 Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation Award for Distinguished Reporting on National Defense for his series, Anatomy of a Russian Attack, and he has also received a National Edward R. Murrow Award in 2009 for his national security reporting. Welcome, JJ, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to say first thank you to INSA for inviting me to do this. And secondly, I'd like to say that was planned. I'm so nervous. Some of you probably know my colleague, Mike Causey, who's one of Washington's most famous journalists, used to work for the Washington Post. I told him I was doing this a few days ago, and he said, if I were you, I would be scared to death. And then Causey told me, he said, look, I've got a safe house down in Dale City or somewhere. He said, you can come and hide out until this thing blows over if you want. So Mike, if you're listening, is it too late? Anyway, thank you to INSA for this opportunity. I want to say the 6 people that I'm seated next to, I have had the pleasure of interviewing every single one of them at least once, with the exception of Vice Admiral Whitworth. And so I kind of feel like this is a bucket list thing today. So I'm going to go ahead and get this started. But before first, I want to say thank you to the public information officers who facilitated everything that we needed to do to get prepared for this. And if I screw it up, then just charge it to my head, not my heart. All right, Vice Admiral Whitworth. Frank Whitworth, the 8th Director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. He leads the NGA under the authorities of the Secretary of Defense, Director of National Intelligence, and he became the director on June 3rd of this year. Dr. Christopher Scalise is next. And by the way, if you don't know already, I'm going from my immediate left all the way to the end. Next person, Dr. Christopher Scalise, was appointed by the 19th director, or rather appointed the 19th director of the National Reconnaissance Office on August 1st of 2019. And they provide direction, guidance, and supervision over all matters pertaining to NRO, and he executes and his team other authorities specifically delegated by the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence. Next, Mr. David Cohen. He's the Deputy Director of CIA. He was also the Deputy Director of CIA from 2015 to 2017, and Under Secretary for Terrorism and International, or rather Financial Intelligence at the Department of Treasury from 2011 to 2015. Next, Lieutenant General Scott Berrier. He is the 22nd Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Prior to joining DIA, he served in the Department of the Army as the 46th G2. Mr. George Barnes. Mr. Barnes serves as the Deputy Director and Senior Civilian Leader of the U.S. National Security Agency. And having occupied this role since 2017, Mr. Barnes acts as NSA's Chief Operating Officer, overseeing strategy, execution, establishing policy, guiding operations, and managing the senior civilian leadership. And last but certainly not least is Mr. Paul Abate. Mr. Abate was named Deputy Director in February of 2021 at the FBI. As the deputy, he oversees all FBI domestic and international investigative and intelligence activities. Mr. Abate began his career in March of 1996, assigned to the New York field office where he worked in the criminal division and was also a member of the SWAT team. So let's give them all a round of applause. Okay, first question, and what a question. A year ago, most of you were here. Not sure if you were in the same position, probably not. And my excellent colleague, Olivia Gazis, was sitting in this chair. And at that time, you guys were talking about China, talking about Afghanistan. A year has passed and a whole lot of things have changed. So I want to know what's changed and how are you dealing with it? And Vice Admiral Whitworth, I'll start with you.
Thanks, JJ, and thanks to INSA for everybody being here. I guess I'm the lucky one. I wasn't here last year. I was serving as the J2 for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and had been doing so. It went over 3 years, in fact. And so speaking now as the NGA director, I can tell you a lot has changed, to your point. On the 3rd of June, when I assumed this directorship, we were on the 100th day of witnessing an unprovoked invasion by Russia into Ukraine. We're now around the 205th. And I can tell you previously as a customer, as a reader of NGA's products, culminating with a map that we may have heard about if you've read a couple of different stories about the Big Green Map. It's real. The Big Green Map is a culmination of multi-int, but at some point, geospatial reality has to become manifest, made manifest, and it's that Big Green Map. It still exists to this day. I still carry it everywhere I go. And so do the chairman, for that matter. And the dependency on at least knowing what's happening in the world and where, and especially with regard to Russia-Ukraine, is as pointed now as it was the day I took the job, and it's becoming increasingly so. One thing that has not changed, you mentioned China. I would offer that it's as much a pacing threat as it was last year during this forum. And I'm proud to say that before we changed anything relative to the personnel or emphasis, energy, time, money at NGA, before we changed any of that in the direction of Russia-Ukraine and monitoring, we had to ensure that we weren't doing so at the expense of our knowledge of China. And then the third thing that I would say is quite pronounced right now. It may not have been talked about as much last year as the role of commercial imagery. And this is something that NRO and NGA are really committed to, is ensuring that, to quote one of my old mentors, Vice Admiral Jacoby, we want it all. Whether it's bringing in additional resilience, better coverage, ensuring we've got good pedigree for analysis, we want it all, and we want to make sure we do it the right way. And that's something that with NRO we've been really dedicated to. The last change, obviously, is a personnel one. Aside from myself, we've got a new deputy director, and Tanya Wilkerson, and she's wonderful, coming from NRO. And then we've also got a new Command Sergeant Major, and we've got a new Assistant Director for Operations, Max Pearson. Sergeant Major is TJ Baird, and he just rotates everywhere to make sure that our force is taken care of.
Perfect. Thank you, Admiral. And I didn't say this, I should have, but I will say it now, but you already know this. We're just doing some opening statements for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to dig down into the real questions. But each one of you gets this question for a couple of minutes, and you were right on the money. So thank you. Dr. Scalise, please, what's changed in the last year for you and your team?
Okay, thank you, JJ, and thanks everybody for being here. I think a lot of what Admiral Whitworth said is applicable. As you know, the NRO is responsible for providing the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems from space. And we deliver that information to our functional managers, NGA, NSA, where it's distributed broadly. Last year at this time, I think we were talking about commercial as something that we were doing and we were going to do. Since then, we have awarded major contracts, expanded it, as Admiral Whitworth has indicated. But more importantly, I think what's really changed is I believe that the community overall has seen that it is indeed integrated into our architecture and that it has significant value. Commercial imagery is providing significant value, not only in allowing us to communicate what's going on, but also providing the opportunity for us to focus the national technical means in areas where that's critically important. So it's proving to be extremely valuable. The other thing I would say is, in the last year, we really got to see what the challenge in space is. We were talking about things, but when Russia did their irresponsible shoot down of a satellite, it became clear that the space domain is truly a conflicted area, and that our satellites, our systems, are at risk. And the international community is taking much more interest in what are the norms of operation in space, because it's something that we critically need if we're going to be safe and have the opportunity to operate not only our national technical means, but our commercial satellites as well. We want to know that we can operate freely in space and understand what the intents of all of the operators in space are. And then third, I would say for us also, it was workforce. Our workforce, performed incredibly well during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic to the extent that we are. We were able to grow our workforce, continue to recruit, bring in some absolutely fantastic people, new graduates from college, our military and other government agencies coming in, which is really invigorating the agency. It's also taught us what we learned in the pandemic we can bring forward into the workplace, and we're continuing to learn and take advantage of that to improve the work environment as well.
Thank you, Dr. Scalise. Next, Deputy Director Cohen, CIA. What's changed for you and your team since last year when I think you were here last year talking about the Taliban, Afghanistan, and China?
Yeah. So first, JJ, it's great to be here. It's great to be here among my colleagues and to have this opportunity to address the INSA conference again. I think from my perspective, there's been both continuity and change. I'll talk about the continuity in a second. On the change front, we did spend a fair amount of time last year talking about Afghanistan and talking about what the future would hold in Afghanistan, particularly for the terrorist threat coming out of Afghanistan. And I think as we sit here today, I think we are at sort of the low end of what our expectations were in terms of the terrorist threat from Afghanistan, in part because of the counterterrorism mission that was undertaken about 6 weeks ago now, where the leader of Al-Qaeda was taken out in downtown Kabul. But this more generally sort of the sense of what the terrorist threat coming out of Afghanistan is, whether it's Al Qaeda or ISIS-K, is in never sort of counting chickens here, but in relatively good shape right now in terms of threat against the homeland. The other issue that we talked about a fair amount last year was China, and so there's both continuity and change on that. So within the CIA, we have been pursuing basically 4 overarching priorities since the beginning of this administration. So China, technology, partnerships, and people. And with respect to China, we have continued to keep our eye on the developments in China, particularly China-Taiwan, but more generally the sort of range of threats and competition coming from China. And we have followed through on our focus on the China issue by standing up a new mission center within CIA, the China Mission Center, which is organizing all of the agency's efforts focused on China. And it is the center by which we are coordinating across the agency all of our efforts against China. We've been following through on technology as well. The other sort of major muscle movement in the agency since we were here last was standing up a new mission center focused on both transnational and technology threats. So it's the Transnational Technology Mission Center. Again, the focal point within the agency, looking at both transnational issues, so issues of climate change, food insecurity, those sorts of issues, but then also really doubling down on our efforts to both understand how technology can be used against us and how we can use technology to do our job better. And look, and then the final piece that I'll just mention is the one significant global change since we were here last was the Russian continued reinvasion of Ukraine, which has drawn a fair amount of attention, I think, from all of us, but as well as from us in the agency, where we have flexed. We're an agile agency. We're able to flex to the challenges of the day, and also to stay very, very close to our Ukrainian partners throughout the run-up to and now more than 6 months into the invasion, where we have continued to invest in our relationships with our partners in Ukraine in a way that I think has paid dividends for us, for sure, and for our policy community in getting insight into what's happening there, and I think also for the Ukrainians.
Thank you, sir. Lieutenant General Barrier, what's changed since last year for you?
JJ, thanks for being here. Good to see you again. Thanks to the INSA team for having us. Thanks to all of you for being here. You might be interested to know that we have all known each other 4 years, and we actually like each other. And I think this is an asymmetric advantage that our intelligence community has that others don't. So it's very interesting to ponder. JJ, I'll start with what hasn't changed. And so what hasn't changed is DI is still responsible for foundational military intelligence across the globe for the Department of Defense. We do that through our great global footprint, through our defense attaché network, our bases, and then also through our combatant commands, which we man all of their J2 shops. So that hasn't changed. The other thing that hasn't changed is China, still the pacing threat. And when I describe China to our workforce and to others, I talk about it as an emerging crisis. And we can all see the rise of China, how their military capabilities have developed over time, and everything that they're doing in every domain. And so that is a constant for us, and we're focusing on that, and I'll come back to that in a second. But on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, I would just say that has been a huge focus for us this year. And with our teammates on the Joint Staff J2 and our teammates in the EUCOM J2 team and NATO partners, we have been heavily engaged. We stood up this thing called the Integrated Crisis Group Russia. A lot of officers involved in situational understanding and situational awareness, and then sharing that with our Ukrainian partners and others to bring the power of the United States to this effort. And so that's been huge for us and very, very consuming. I think the second thing that I'd like to chat about is just partnerships. And we have doubled down on partnerships across the globe to include in the Indo-Pacific, within NATO, partners in Europe and all over to really expand what it is we're doing so that we can put a little O for operationalization into DIA so that we can bring effects to intelligence support for the department. And then lastly, I think we have undergone a reorganization in DIA. And I talked a little bit about it last year. We created a deputy director for global integration. That's one senior who is responsible for integrating the efforts and effects of the entire agency so that we're all unified and we're using our resources to the best we can. And then like the CIA, we have stood up this thing called the China Mission Group to really do the same thing, to synchronize our efforts on the China Taiwan problem, and we'll be prosecuting that from here on out. It'll go into effect next month, and we'll build it as we go. So I think those are primarily the things that have changed. AJ, thanks.
Thank you, Director. Deputy Director Barnes, NSA. What's
Great.
changed since last year?
A lot has changed and other things have not changed. And so if I look back at last September, it was really a pivotal moment for us. We had spent over 20 years working with Protecting Forces Forward in Afghanistan, and we were very anxious about getting them out safely and then the condition we left in Afghanistan for them as well as for our global security. I think one of the things that we wanted to do and needed to do, and we've done to a great degree thus far, is prove to ourselves that we could distribute our focus more globally to confront those challenges that we're all talking about, beyond the focus on terrorism threats to our nation, our homeland, our allies, but also to deal with the emerging and evolving threats posed against us by China and Russia and some of their other friends. We were anxious, can we do that and sustain the counterterrorism focus that we've had? And we have proven that. We continue to prove that. All of us are locked in this journey. We will continue. And so just as David mentioned, August was an example. There are others. We will continue that battle. And it might not have all the fanfare that it had, but it is happening day in, day out, behind the curtains. And so we will bring people to justice if they threaten us. Beyond that, at the time of last September, we were dealing with the aftermath of other things that have confronted our nation. Russian pursuits against us through the solar winds penetrations. China's work trying to exploit Microsoft Exchange servers. You may have heard of the Hafnium exploits. Dealing with those, trying to attribute them, trying to understand the degree to which they affected our society, not just our government. And that was really on the heels of us trying to stand up a response to that gets to the whole thing that Scotty mentioned with respect to partnerships. And one of the things we did last year was stand up our Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, which was purpose-built to actually have a new type of engagement with industry and our cybersecurity mission partners across our government and governments worldwide. So those were big shifts. And then on top of that, as was mentioned, we had the little surprise of Russia and their aspirations for Ukraine. And I think, again, we are all friends. We don't just act like it up here. We work day in and day out together. We try to leverage each other's authorities, capabilities to get a synchrony of action and impact on adversaries that would put risk on us or our allies. And so we're trying to do that in spades. We feel the pressure of it every day, but I think Russia is an example of that really working well. Another big focus we have, as was mentioned, is workforce. I'm delighted to know that our booth at NSA booth out here is getting a lot of attraction yesterday and today. That's good because we need good people. We've just on the back end of hiring about 2,000 people this year. We have a bigger goal next year. It's a daunting challenge to hire that many people who not only are bringing their skills, but can get through our clearance process. So, and that's hard because the threat is there. The threat is among us, and we are trying to be mindful of the fact that being an open society, that's the strength that we project, but it also creates weaknesses. And so we have to make sure that our security apparatus evolves at the pace of need. And so the workforce of the future has many choices. And one of the things we're confronting is the fact that people don't want to wait to go through the clearance process. They don't want to come into a SCIF to work. They want to be educated after they get with us, not just before they get to us. And so we are wrestling with all those dynamics that the new workforce presents to us and trying to be responsive and to actually re-engineer the way we engage with our future.
Thank you, Deputy Director Barnes. Mr. Abate, how has life changed for you and your team at the FBI?
Thank you. Thank you, JJ. Great to see you. Thank you to the INSA team for inviting us all back, and thanks to all of you for being here. So much of the territory has been covered already by partners here. I think in terms of the threat, it's remained very consistent and persistent, as has already been reflected in the remarks. Within that, the actors have changed in part. The form, the avenues of approach that the threats, the actors are coming at us, the places where that's occurring in part have changed. But I think it's, from the FBI perspective, important to look at it from both a short-term and a long-term perspective. We're very focused, we remain so, on, in the short term, preventing loss of life, as we all are here, in defending our country. When I think about that, I think about terrorism and our efforts in countering terrorism primarily. It's a no-fail mission, obviously a life and death proposition, and when we look across the world, it's really a more dangerous environment that we're in today than it was a year ago from our perspective, based on what we're seeing. Terrorists and terrorist organizations are more widely dispersed through affiliates and associated groups around the world. We have renewed safe havens. Afghanistan, as an example, where terrorists have a greater ability now to plot and plan and remain intent on attacking us here and hurting and killing people. There's no doubt about that. So we have to stay focused on that in the short term, first and foremost, to ensure that we protect human life, number one. And then in the longer term, going back to the counterintelligence threat that was noted here, nation-state adversaries like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran have continued to be unrelenting in their efforts to attack and undermine our country and our democracy. And really, when you look at that, it doesn't pose the immediate urgent threat of physical harm in all instances, but it's more so the risk and what we're seeing, the erosion of our national security, our economic security, and our way of life, really. And that's an even greater fight. So from the FBI perspective, we're even more focused on that than ever. We have recalibrated and reevaluated our resourcing on that, and we've done some shifts without losing focus in the short term in the counterterrorism mission, but we're looking out into the future as well, along with all the partners here, to make sure that we're defending our country to the utmost and ensuring that there isn't any further erosion in the things I mentioned, economic, national security, and the democratic principles that we live under here. And then, as George noted, more on the business side, the challenges have remained the same in terms of hiring. We're all working hard to make sure that we reach out to and recruit the best talent with the right skills that meet the criteria that we need to bring into our agencies and departments to do the work and carry the mission forward. We're fortunate, as was noted, to have consistency, I think, in leadership, both at the highest level and within the workforce itself. It's important, to carry on the understanding, the experience, and in order to not repeat the mistakes of the past, and take the lessons learned and apply them so we can work more efficiently to counter the threats we face going forward. And I'll stop there. Thank you, JJ.
Thank you, Mr. Abate. I want to jump into some questions for each of you, specific to you, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but it's something that absolutely has to be brought up, and that is Russia. We've talked about it a little bit today, and I'm not trying to make this a complete conversation about that, but I want to start with you, Director Barrier, about Russia specifically. When this whole phase of the invasion on February 24th began, you knew, all of you knew what Russia was up to, at least to some degree. It was pretty clear by that intelligence that was declassified and put out there. But I'm interested in knowing what you think Russia has now going for it, because we realized they basically were de-masked. You know, they've been shown not to be that big military juggernaut that everybody, or at least some people, thought they were. And some of your international colleagues have said that they really are running out of time and running out of people, running out of resources. So I'm interested in asking what you think, what DIA thinks about how long Russia continues to do this.
Sure. Thanks for the question. It's occupying a lot of time for the folks here on stage. I would just say that I believe the Russians plan for an occupation, not necessarily an invasion. And that has set them back because they underestimated the Ukrainian will to fight, and the Ukrainians have done really, really well, and they're doing really well right now. This is really tough for the Russians because they've expended a lot of resources. They've not yet mobilized. And so they're coming to a point right now where I think Putin may have to reevaluate what his objectives are for this operation, because it's pretty clear right now at a steady state he's not going to be able to achieve what he initially intended to do. And so I think he's coming to some decisions. What those decisions will be, we don't know, but that will largely drive how long this conflict lasts. I think we're going into a long winter, and we'll see how both sides emerge. I think the interesting thing is how the international community has coalesced around Ukraine and the support that they have given Ukraine, and really the intelligence that we've helped with in this situation.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. The international community has definitely jumped in and done what Ukraine needed. If any of you want to chime in on that question or a question, please just raise your hand or just say something. Let me know.
We were basically joined at the hip for the last year on this issue, and so I'll just offer, I concur with General Barrier and possible inflection point. However, a historical approach to this is also an important kind of reminder that it's not over. If you look at most of the efforts undergone in the military domain by Russia over the last 100 years, they normally start poorly, and they become a learning organization and they adjust. So I think to Director Barrier's point, they've got a possible adjustment in store, and we'll have to see what comes next. We're going to be vigilant no matter what they decide.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vice Admiral Whitworth. So, Deputy Director Barnes, part of what Russia's done in Ukraine in another way, maybe in another lifetime, is something that they, as a part of the Soviet Union, would like to have done to the United States or other countries, but they can't, they won't. And so what they're doing is other things. I spoke with the defense minister from Estonia yesterday and asked him how Russia would retaliate for what has happened in the last few days. And he said the same thing they've always been doing, is cyber attacks. And we know that Russia, based on the intelligence that your organizations put out there a few years ago, was heavily involved in our elections in 2016. So the question I'd like to ask you is, what are you doing now? Because we've got another midterms coming up, we've got another presidential election coming up a couple years. What are you doing now to position your agency to do the best that it can to help the U.S.?
Certainly. So first and foremost, throughout the continuum, we have our eyes and ears. We do the ears, they do the eyes. But we are focused on the cybersecurity risks that they pose to the Ukrainians, but also to us and our allies. That has been there, it continues to be there. The calculus of its application is something that we continue to try to look for, because I think many of you will recall back in January, there were a few actions that were exerted by the Russians against the Ukrainians before the 24th. And we thought that foretold the story of a greater, more cataclysmic pursuit on critical infrastructure, their power grid, their transportation, and those types of things. That didn't happen to the degree we expected. We are looking at what was the calculus, and to the point of General Barrier, they were looking for an occupation. And so that colored their calculus with respect to the level of destruction, because they expected to actually roll in and operate, and they didn't want to bring down something that they in turn needed to use the next day. Mm-hmm. And so fast forward to now. Well, what does it mean as they get frustrated? Things aren't working out too well on the ground. And so we continue to watch for indicators that they will exert influences, capabilities, technology that they have had. I think all of the efforts that have played out with the Ukrainian pushback has actually jolted the Russian system a bit. And so they are extremely capable, as we've seen their operations against us and others, and they can be. We have to continue to try to pry open the secrets that they're holding to really understand the calculus of application of capability by just having it. And at the same time, we have a midterm election coming up, right? And so just like in the last several cycles, again, we are continuing to look at that across all of us to make sure that as they're working on Ukraine, don't ever think that they aren't working influence here at home.
That's one of the big questions. What kind of capacity do they have to do anything else? Just briefly, and anybody can answer this. What kind of capacity do they have left to engage in the kind of aggressive behavior against the rest of the world now that they've been hit so hard in Ukraine, embarrassed so many times on the world stage? And certainly, I know that there are questions to some degree inside Russia about the leadership and where it goes.
Yep. So I would just, to the capacity point, of course, the capacity against Ukraine is the governmental apparatus as well as those that they hire. The capacity against elections has been a lot of hired services. That's been their MO. They continue to do that. And so it's up to us to uncover that, expose that, and thwart it together through exposure as well as other types of pushback. And so that's what we're doing collectively.
Deputy Director Cohen, I want to connect this to the pacing challenge that you and a couple of your colleagues have talked about with reference to China. And I want to know if there are any lessons learned from this Russia-Ukraine situation that inform how you think about that pacing challenge with China, and also China's wanton looks at Taiwan. How does this Russia-Ukraine situation inform how you view any possibility of concern in Taiwan from China?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We are watching very carefully, in particular, how the Chinese are understanding the situation in Ukraine, how the Russians have performed, how the Ukrainians have performed, and the implications of that for their own plans as they may be for Taiwan. Well, what we know is that President Xi has told his military that by 2027 he wants to have the capability to take Taiwan by force if they choose to do so. He has not made a decision. Our assessment is not, he has made no decision to do that, but that he has asked his military to put him in a position where if that's what he wanted to do, he would be able to. I think it's still the assessment of the community, the intelligence community as a whole, that Xi's interest in Taiwan is to get control of Taiwan essentially through non-military means. But on the military side of things, I think we are watching very carefully the lessons that have been learned, including, you have a Russian military that has, had not seen combat, certainly on this level, in many, many years. The same is true for the PLA, for the Chinese military. So I think one of the questions that we are looking at is whether Xi is sort of taking the lesson that a military that hasn't really been in combat, hasn't been stressed in the way that the Russian military is being stressed in Ukraine, how much confidence he can have in his own military going forward. And then look, on the Taiwan side, sort of the analog to Ukraine, I think we're also assessing the ability of Taiwan to defend itself, both to deter the Chinese from trying to move militarily or otherwise, and then, if necessary, to defend itself, and how the Taiwans are thinking about that in relation to what has gone on in Ukraine. So there are a lot of lessons. Okay. And one last point, as everybody has made clear, the the lessons to come out of Ukraine are, it's not over. There's still more lessons to be learned, and I think as that conflict continues, I think both the Chinese, the United States, and others will continue to draw lessons from there that will have applicability in the China-Taiwan context.
I think there's another piece that just to build on that. China is watching very closely how this is playing out, right? And one of the most powerful things we have is we have a coalition of nations that are exerting pressure on Russia for its behavior. And that has many ramifications, imminent and long-term. China is much more interconnected globally, and so they are going to be thinking very hard about the repercussions beyond the physical force piece, the repercussions in their global situation of making moves like that. And so I think they're watching very closely at how this is playing out and what the pushback has been, not just from those of us that are supplying support directly to the Ukrainians, but the broader community with economic leverage.
Interesting point.
10 seconds.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just I want to underscore one thing. I think the conflict involving Russia and Ukraine has underscored the value of warning. There have been times that we've been in venues like this in the last decade where people said warning was broken. I think it reinforced that a strong sense of warning and dedication to warning can actually be one of your most important assets. We want to know and be able to warn if competition's moving into conflict.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Director Abate, and then I'm coming to you, Dr. Scalise. I've got some specific space questions specifically, but Deputy Director Abate, you talked about the short and long-term perspective, having that, and knowing you for a few years, you're very deliberate and very careful about pretty much everything that I know professionally about you, and thinking about things very carefully is important. I need to ask this question, though. The FBI itself, here, domestically, has come under, for lack of a better word, withering attacks from a number of groups, organizations, and there are those that believe that some of this is driven by foreign misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, whatever you want to call it. What I'd like to hear you engage on a bit is to give us a little bit of insight about how the FBI is preparing itself, because it's, this may be me getting ahead of myself, but just based on what we see, it may get worse before it gets better. So I'm just wondering how your team and you and all of the leadership are preparing for the next 2, 4, 6 years of what we've seen, or what we might see, rather.
We're focused on that now, and we have been. I think it's important to frame it historically. We do, in the work we do on behalf of the nation through the Bureau, much of it is sensitive in nature, spanning from public corruption to counterintelligence investigations. So the type of things that we hear now, I think have always occurred over time, but they're more so in front of us all through the media and social media and the various platforms and the prominence of those now. So the way we approach that, JJ, is we do the work by the book. We focus on the facts and the evidence objectively and neutrally in everything that we do. That's the bottom line. It doesn't matter what type of intelligence we're focused on collecting or what types of investigations we're carrying out. That's the bottom line. That's how Director Ray approaches it. That's how I approach it. That's how our leadership team approaches it. And that's how our workforce approaches it. We have very rigorous standards within the Department of Justice and the FBI, very strict guidelines at all levels that we operate under that are encircled by the law and the Constitution, and we, rigorously strive to adhere to those in everything that we do each and every day. We have had instances where we know people have done bad things. It's like any organization. They've committed misconduct. They've gone outside of policy. They've even gone outside of the law. In some instances, they've made mistakes. We work hard to ensure every day that that does not happen. Number one, through training, we've implemented, additional policies and procedures based on lessons learned. We think through and apply those lessons learned each and every day in everything that we do and every decision that's made. And when people, the very small few that may go astray, we hold them accountable to the absolute degree.
So just one follow-up very quickly. Do you think that, a lot of what you said basically is we're seeing a lot of what's taking place now because of, well, basically cameras everywhere. Everybody's got mobile phones and social media and, not to say that, people with cameras and phones are responsible for us knowing all these things, but there's a lot more focus on these things than before because the information wasn't out there. Plus there's the pace of change too that has driven a lot of information that we get that we didn't get before. But do you think that the issues that the FBI are facing in any part are in part because of foreign actors trying to drive us learning more about these things, seeing more about these things, whether they're true or not?
Absolutely. It's hard to assess to what degree that's occurring or exists, but there's no doubt that all of the nation-state adversaries that we've already talked about here are certainly, to some degree, pursuing that avenue to, sow discord,
undermine,
cause harm to the U.S. government, to departments and agencies, including ours. Within that, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And we're on the lookout for that each and every day through the work we do, the intelligence, the information we collect, and we look to counter that when we can.
Thanks. Dr. Scalise, talk about space for a minute. It used to be a very different place, It was a very exclusive, and still today, it's still a pretty exclusive domain. Not every country can send people there and explore space, but it's become a bit more hostile, and it's become a bit more important than most folks thought of in the past. So just give us an assessment of what it's like in space now, what you see there, and what your role is in making sure the U.S. has everything it needs in terms of dealing with that domain.
Certainly. Well, our role is basically the same as it's been for 60 years, which is to provide the overhead ISR that the nation needs, and we continue to do that. But you're right, the environment has changed significantly in good ways and in not so good ways. On the good side, what we've seen certainly over the last 10 years and perhaps more in an accelerated way in the last 5 years, is the cost of launch drop considerably. And that's opened up avenues for a lot of additional capabilities in space. Communications, we're seeing more where you can almost use a cell phone to communicate anywhere around the globe now because we can get connectivity. And that's a good thing. It also offers us the opportunity to, for the bad things that are going on, which is people are trying to deny the United States its use of space, to allow us to build a more resilient architecture. So as the cost of launch has gone down, other companies have come along and developed spacecraft, almost commodity spacecraft. Not quite there yet, but close. Certainly, lower cost than we've seen before, which has allowed us to proliferate our architectures and to provide a basic capability that will be resilient to various forms of attack, so that we can provide the ISR that the nation needs without having to worry about a total loss, as we would if we only had a few things up there. Also, the commercial world, as if you go out here now and you see a number of commercial companies that are providing capabilities from space, and as was mentioned earlier, commercial imagery, commercial RF now is becoming available. offering us much better opportunities to expand our look and to expand our ability to share data and to reduce the burden on national systems so they can be focused on areas where you need either a very different capability or a very exquisite capability, which we can go off and provide. And finally, I would say really on the challenging side, in particular Russia and China, but other state and non-state actors are actively engaged in doing things. It's pretty low cost, unattributable to go off and conduct cyber operations. We work very hard, all of us, no matter where you are in industry or government. It's a continuing fight to stay ahead of the cyber actors. So that's one, but we're also seeing, particularly with China, the capability to develop counter space weapons, both ASATs, things in space. Russia is there as well to deny our ability to operate. So we have to design systems that are resilient to those attacks. And the last thing I'll say is we're demonstrating that not only on the ground and what we do in space, but also with our partners. We have great partners. Certainly everybody here are great partners working with. We work very closely with the Space Force and Space Command to assure that we have space domain awareness and we understand what's going on. But also our international partners are absolutely critical. In the last year, we had 6 launches. 3 of them were not from the traditional place, right? Typically, we launch from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and Vandenberg Space Force Station. Now we've launched from Wallops Island in Virginia, and we've had 2 launches from New Zealand to go off and demonstrate it, and later this year we'll have a launch from the United Kingdom. So our partners are an incredible asset to what we have, and I think you see that with Russia and China. You don't see the same degree of partnership and the same unity outside of their country as we do. So I would say those things. Space, fortunately, the commercial sector, the launch, has brought down the cost of space. That's allowed us to do many things that we want to go off and do. Mm-hmm. And then we have a somewhat traditional one with cyber, but we're seeing much more in the way of activity in space, and then our partnerships just add to our capabilities.
Isn't it crazy how fast time goes? So we have a shrinking amount of time. So obviously that's always the case. But I want to get to some audience questions because we have another 15 minutes or so here, and make sure that you guys, who are absolutely the most important, get your opportunity. So this first question is to everybody, and please feel free to keep it short so that everybody can weigh in. How are your agencies using open source information to enhance the insights provided by classified intelligence? What technologies are you using to make sense of all the available data? I'm not going to put a time limit on that, but I'm just going to say, if you could just give each other an opportunity to have everybody answer. Director Whitworth, you want to start that?
No, it's a great question. It's I was just listening to Dr. Scalise, and I had a feeling this question was coming. As he launches more stuff and buys more pixels, it puts an imperative on what are you going to do with all that and how are you going to make sense of it. I've written that I think we're in a reluctant revolution in military affairs, or RMA, and part of what makes that hard is something I call deluge control. What are we going to do with the deluge of data, the deluge of information? Accordingly, I think the Secretary of Defense and Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security have been wise to ask us to get ready to inherit a program called MAVEN. This program has been dedicated to the integration of artificial intelligence and machine learning for trying to get ahead of deluge control. It's imperative. It's almost existential, frankly, to the business, certainly in geospatial intelligence. And I think we're going to be sharing. This is going to be a foundry for a lot of different applications. CDAO at the Department of Defense is going to take some portions of this portfolio, but for the geospatial piece where we have just tons and tons of data, we need good triage and good queuing from good algorithms. So that's our plan.
Okay, let's go to you, Director Cohen, Deputy Director Cohen first, and then we'll come back to Dr. Scalise.
Yeah, I'll just say two quick things. One, we have an open source enterprise as part of the agency that is responsible for deriving from the enormous quantity of open source information that is available in the foreign field, insights that we feed into our analytic work. We are an all source analytic agency. We rely on the intelligence produced by our partners, and we rely on open source information as well. The technology that we need in order to derive the insights out of that mass of information is in part the artificial intelligence, actually in large part artificial intelligence, as well as other technologies. So part of what I was mentioning just before, our emphasis on technology is one lane in that is to make sure that we are well positioned to derive these insights. The other piece I will just say on open source is with the explosion of open source information, it reinforces the focus that we have on our human intelligence mission and bearing down in what is sort of the most difficult of our tasks, which is spotting, assessing, recruiting, and running assets who provide human intelligence, making sure that as we undertake that very difficult and dangerous mission, both for the asset as well as for our officers, that we are focused on what we really need to obtain through human intelligence as we are taking in other forms of intelligence, including open source.
Okay, and I realize as well, some of you may not want to answer that question, and if it's okay.
I'll jump in.
Yeah. General Barrier, did you want to answer that or no?
I'll just a couple of quick points. In 1976, Lieutenant General Sam Wilson, former DI director, said 70% of everything we do is from the open source. 1976. It's a lot more than that today. DIA has been designated as the Defense Intelligence Enterprise Manager for open source for the entire DoD, and that is 1,000 flowers blooming that we're trying to get our hands around. So for DIA, those authorities allow me to convene a meeting, but I can't tell the service secretary what to do. But what we can do is provide standards on training, tradecraft, policy guidance, how we do this, what we buy, how much we pay for it, and we're developing tools as we speak. We're in close partnership with our teammates at the CIA as we do this together. It's really one team with their operation in our open source intelligence center, so we're moving forward very rapidly.
Okay. Deputy Director Barnes.
I'll just say that we use it for all types of functions, as leads, but also to fill in blanks. And then invariably, as we have situations where nation-state or non-nation-state actors do bad things, open source avails a digital trail. And so if you look at 60 Minutes did a piece on Navalny, or CNN, and 60 Minutes has done another piece, different open source focused firms have actually used the digital footprints we all leave behind to piece together cases that can corroborate intel we may or may not have and allow us to point to direct attribution to bring people to justice and have culpability sometimes faster and sometimes when we couldn't have it any other way. And so it's a force multiplier that actually we need to and we are tapping into as a community.
Okay. Mr. Abate, it's kind of hard to tell if you're interested in answering that or not, but I'll just ask you. Do you want to?
Look, it's a huge challenge from a number of perspectives, legal, policy, technology, with the volume and proliferation of information that's out there publicly and in open source. With that challenge, it's also a great opportunity because, as just was pointed out by George, it helps us identify threats that are coming at us, and it helps us build out the threat picture as well. So we all, as has been noted, work closely on developing the tools and technologies to deal with that volume and gain access to that information. But it's all interconnected. It's not just here within government. The private sector plays a huge role in that, in the public. So this is just one perspective on it, but from a terrorism, a violence threat perspective, which we're focused on every day, even going beyond the national security realm in terrorism, but mass shootings, things like that. The public plays a huge role in terms of looking at everything that's out there and identifying those threats and indicators and bringing them to us. We have a public access line that takes e-tips and phone calls, and we average over 4,000 calls and tips per day. Most of those, when resolved, turn out to be nothing, but there's so many instances that aren't even talked about or highlighted each and every day where we've been able to work with partners in the IC and in state, local, federal law enforcement to go out and disrupt things that would have otherwise happened and prevent people from being harmed. And that's that reflects the value of the information that's out there, and just one way that we're dealing with it and using it to leverage and help us achieve the mission.
Okay, I want to jump to the workforce, and part of the reason why I want to do that is because a lot of folks here have a vested interest in this. So, and I also realize we have a bit more time than I thought we did, so that's good. So, more questions. But this workforce question, regarding workforce goals, what are your agency's skill gaps? What is your strategy to bring the next generation workforce on board? Dr. Scalise, you want to go with that?
Sure, yeah. So we're actually really excited. We had a really good recruiting year and a good set of interns that were able to come in. And I don't know, many people don't know that the NRO originally did not have its own workforce, but about little more than 6 years ago, that came up, and it's really been coming to the fore. So what are the areas that we're interested in? Well, pretty much everything, as you can imagine, because of what we do. Clearly, our focus is on the technology side. We need engineers and scientists to go off and conceive of the systems that we build, but we need financial, legal, and others to public affairs to help us get our job done. Some of the areas that we're really looking at and see that we need collectively in order to focus more on. We were talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and they've sort of become buzzwords. But what we really need is we're amassing a lot of data. We're collecting a lot of data in space. We're operating larger constellations. We're operating dissimilar systems. So we really need engineers and scientists and mathematicians that can operate on large volumes of data, make sense out of it, establish algorithms that will allow NGA, NSA to task our systems. And you have to think, once you start getting large constellations, you don't say point this at that. It's going to be give me information on X, and we have to go off and work that. Okay. So we really need engineers and scientists that can go off and work that. Okay. And then, of course, I think everybody probably, because I think we all compete against each other, even though we're friends, is the cybersecurity world to get more in that area. But frankly, this is a very good time to bring people in. Then I just want to add one other thing. Being in the intelligence community, we're in a digital revolution, as has been said. That's allowing us to do things much more efficiently than we ever did it before. And it's going to change our workplace. Yeah. Because we're going to have to be able to go off and allow things that we hadn't thought about before, like Bluetooth in the factory, so that we don't have to go off and say, okay, what's this voltage measurement, and write it down on a piece of paper. Yeah. So we're off looking at how we're going to go off and implement those types of things as well.
Admiral Whitworth, I know you have some things to say about AI and machine learning as well, and I'm interested in how critical are those areas to your work right now?
So this goes back to Maven, and notwithstanding whenever we are directed, we're preparing to have a transition from USDI to NGA for MAVEN so that we take responsibility for the MAVEN program. And that means the foundry of the algorithm, but also its application to the deluge of geospatial intelligence. So this comes down to having too much information, too little time, too few people, and how do you ensure you're triaging and queuing attention? And that's going to be the future of NGA, and I would hazard to guess most of the people on this stage as well.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind, on the workforce itself.
Yes.
So for people who are going to help us with this sense making, yes, absolutely, geodesists, data scientists, photogrammetric experts, people in the geospatial sciences. What's exciting is what's happening in places like St. Louis, where we have identified, as we have a new military construction project in a pretty tough area of town that needs some regeneration, a way to bring in the academic community and civic leaders to say, okay, for that child in that neighborhood who sees across the fence, how do I work in there? Scholarships established by a consortium of schools on the geospatial sciences to say, yeah, there's a way for you to work across a fence, and that's what I hope going to be a beacon on the hill for a lot of communities and a lot of elements of the IC.
Okay. Anybody else that wants to weigh in on the workforce question, do so at any time. I've got a couple of specific questions for people that have been asked by the audience. Deputy Director Cohen, I'm going to come to you first with this one. There's one for you that says, Mr. Cohen, as the U.S. intel and weapons help Ukraine become more decisive in this fight, is the risk of Russia using WMD going up?
I'm going to come back to the workforce issue, answer this question first. Look, I think as we are watching what's happening in Ukraine and the recent advances that the Ukrainians have made, particularly in the north, in Kharkiv, but also mounting an offensive in the south, the questions are, I think, going to be asked by Putin of his military leaders, sort of what's happening, why is it happening, what can we do to to push back and to retain our position, and as well to try to follow through on his ambition. I don't think we should underestimate either Putin's adherence to his original objective here, which was to control Ukraine. I don't think we have any reason to believe that he has moved off of that objective, or his risk appetite. We should not underestimate his risk appetite. That being said, we have not seen sort of concrete evidence of planning for use of any WMD, but we're obviously sharply focused on that question.
Okay.
Can I say one word about the workforce?
Yes, just briefly. I realize we're running out of time again. But
Go
ahead, sir.
All I want to say is that, as I mentioned at the outset, we have 4 priorities at the agency, overarching priorities: China, technology, partnerships, and people. On that last piece, on the people piece, we have been working extraordinarily hard to ensure that the work environment at the CIA is one where we are both able to attract people, get them on board more quickly, and retain them. We are very focused on wellness across the board at the agency, which means both taking care of the sort of resilience and health, from physical health, mental health, psychological health, financial health, as well as the future of work issues that folks have talked about, so that we can continue to attract the workforce that we need in an environment where we can't offer the same sort of flexibility that the private sector can in terms of working from home and working in your PJs. We don't do that. You got to come into work, but we're looking for ways to ensure that the agency continues to be able to both attract and retain this workforce we're going to need in the future.
I'm now officially in the red. The clock's going the other way. Okay. This is it. All right. So if any of you have anything else you want to say, I
apologize for monopolizing the last minute, but I want to get that out.
That is completely okay. We're at 5425 Wisconsin Avenue, Chevy Chase. You all come up We'll feed you anytime, your staff, and you can talk as long as you want. But I want to thank you all. I have to jump out now, but I want to thank you so much for doing this, and the need for all of us to stay on stage. They want to take a photograph. Thank you all for coming, and just please give these folks a big hand, their staffs, and INSA.
Well done, gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage AFCEA Intelligence Committee Chair Bob Noonan and INSA President Suzanne Wilson Heckenberg.
Thank you, JJ, for moderating a great panel. Thanks to all the leaders for your candor and, most importantly, your commitment to our nation, all that you do. So please join me, and not only for these leaders here, but for all the leaders that gave their time so generously over the past couple of days. Another round of applause for this great group of people.
Thanks, Bob. And I fully appreciate I'm standing between people getting back to their offices or getting an early start on the weekend. But Bob, we genuinely appreciate the partnership we have here with AFCEA. We've certainly hit our stride. And so good seeing so many of our sponsors and exhibitors and attendees in person. I want to thank the INSA and AFCEA staffs, Louis Shepard, John Doyen, Holly Morell, Aaron Rosenthal, Gretchen Gunning, Toya Cribbs, Tina Viscusio, and Peggy O'Connor, who are all integral in their roles today and yesterday here at the summit. And again, thank you for the partnership.
All right. Thanks also Tish and Susan. Great job. Thanks, great team. Thanks to all of you for your participation in that. Lots of opportunities have been discussed out here, and I think it's a great chance to do what we all really want to do, and that's to participate in the team sport of defending this great country of ours. So thanks. Have a great AFCEA, INSA, Intelligence and National Security Summit weekend. Stay safe. Thank you very much.